con el auspicio de Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, Serenidad Spa Terapéutico, Permasalud Glamping, Marathon Sports.
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to another program. Today, we're going to share with you the second part of the interview I did to Alex de Grassi. And this interview, we're going to focus on his albums for the 21st century. Actually, the albums after Tata Monk. And we will talk about the albums and share the music. Now, the music you will be able to listen in our video for Vimeo and also in Spotify and iVoox. But the interview is going to be solely in YouTube. And so you can choose where to listen the show. Obviously, with the music is so much better, but choices are choices. So we'll talk about his album, Now and Then, Folk Songs for the 21st Century, The Mania, As You Drift Away, The Bridge, Zero Gravity, and his latest work, which is so beautiful, is an album of country music and beautifully sung by these ladies. And I think you really will enjoy this interview and the music that Alex has to share with us for the program today. If you want to listen to the first show, which involved all the music from the first album until Tata Monk, you can listen to our Vimeo channel for the first interview, or you can go to our website, radioserenidad.com, and in the link for Programa New Age, you will find the shows. This show was offered to the audience in September, and now we are for the second part today. So I really hope you enjoy the music, enjoy Alex de Grassi and all the musicians that have been with him on this musical journey. We will be back with the music and the interview with Alex after listening to some announcements. Thank you.
Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, hogar sustituto para adultos mayores. Contáctanos al 099-753-8085. Síguenos en TikTok, Facebook e Instagram como Goipas R, Vimeo y YouTube como Radio Serenidad S. En WhatsApp 593-999-203-203, radioserenidad.com.
So, as I mentioned in the last program we had with Alex, we're going to have a second part for the music that he created for this century. And first of all, I want to thank Alex for being with us again today. And Alex, actually, for the turn of the century, something strange happened with the New Age music, exclusively music movement, as if it started losing its brightness, and like it started to slow down and drift away from all the powerful music that was created in the 80s and the 70s, all this amazing music that I know that most musicians had difficulty accepting the label New Age, but there was, I know it's because of the mainstream media, how they manage and the bad publicity the name had, but it was from my perspective and being from South America, you know, the term New Age was very distinctive and good for the kind of music that was channeled through that name. But yet in the turn of the century, it drifted away, and, you know, the labels started changing, the music started changing. What was your feeling on what happened as we turn of the century in regards to this kind of new age music, the strength it had before.
Yeah, well, from my perspective, the the strength was that it hadn't really, in my opinion, hadn't ever really been a very it hadn't been a specific genre, I mean, just going way back for a moment here, I remember when my first recording came out in 78, and I was really happy that it got the reception it did, and this was before the term new age had really been applied to music. And I went into a Tower record store, and they said, "Wow, we're selling your record." And I said, "Well, where do you put it in the store?" And they said, "Well, we don't know where to put it. We we put some in the folk section, we put some in the classical section, and we put some in the bluegrass. But we just put it in those different sections because we want to make sure people find it, but we're not really sure where to put it." So, now fast forward to the time you're talking about, and a lot happened in those years in terms of people's perceptions of genre and different kinds of music. So, when I started back then, I just thought this is just guitar music. Okay, I'm going to keep it simple, solo steel string guitar. But as the Windham Hill label grew, and musicians who played other instruments, and groups that played that were maybe inflected with different world musics. Like I think of the group Night Noise was an Irish Celtic group on the Windham Hill label, and it started to demand some kind of a genre. And I think what happened is a lot of that music sort of played out, and a lot of the players in it who were in that kind of moved on a little bit. And I don't think that's necessarily a good or a bad thing, but they went on to do other things. And in the meantime, the bigger labels, they saw that there was some success with labels like Windham Hill, Narada, Higher Octave, these kinds of things, and they bought into them literally, and eventually took them over. But they didn't really understand, I don't think, what they had, what this was about, why the labels had been successful. So they tried to, I think, continue trying to sell what they thought would sell well, or sign people and things that would sell well, and people just weren't really buying it, as much. I mean, for a while they did, but I think, and people like myself, now, we're going to talk about this 21st century, and one of the first projects I did was arrangement of folk songs for the 21st century. And, I looked at this as a project to arrange and do some recreate those folk songs from my childhood. So I wasn't thinking new age at that point, like what's going to be a successful new age record. I just thought I'm going to, I had started my own label with the Tropo Records in 98 with the release of The Water Garden, and we had good success. It got nominated for a Grammy and so forth. And we thought, well, okay, we're kind of on a new path at this point. And Windham Hill, meanwhile, had been bought out by BMG, and they were trying to do different things with it. And all the old people had left or had had their contracts terminated. So,
Yeah.
it just seemed like that original thing had played out a bit, and it was sort of time to move on and do different things.
Oh, that's good to hear because, like, for us, the listeners or the ones who buy the albums, we don't know, how the deals happen between the labels and the musicians, and how important it is, not only the label but the producer of an album. We just get the finished product and we delight on it or not, but the feeling from this side of the listening spectrum was that now I understand that maybe the incapacity of the labels to understand what was created made most musicians lose
their interest and creativity to go the way that the big labels wanted them to go,
Yeah.
because there was no understanding of the essence of what Will did with Wingham Hill. And you mentioned Higher Octave, and there was Music West, and there was American Gramophone and Celestial Harmonies, and so many labels that they were hard. Narada, obviously, private music. They were heart driven, and now I understand that it had to sort of die, and everybody kind of do their thing. And now that we're coming to talk about the folk songs, exactly, um I wonder what is it about the folk songs that really attracted you to do this album with for the 21st century?
Yeah. Well, so I had been part of the tour in, I believe it was 1999, called the International Guitar Night, and it was the first iteration of it. It was the first year that this particular uh, guitar night had been, booked for a tour, and we had there were four of us playing on this, and that became kind of the model for the future international guitar nights. And uh, Brian Gore had organized this, and he was pretty much unknown, but it was his idea, and he kind of hosted it, if you will, and also performed. There was also uh, a wonderful Brazilian guitar player on that tour. Come on, brain. And Adam Del Monte was a flamenco musician who was also on the label. And uh, the oh, come on, Alex, you'll Paolo Bellinati. I'm sorry. So Paolo Bellinati, this fabulous Brazilian guitarist, was on the tour. Adam Del Monte, a flamenco guitarist who was trained classically and played flamenco, and we just had a wonderful time. It was a great tour because so much talent, and in particular, I was really uh, attracted to the music that Paolo Bellinati was composing and performing. And what he was doing was he's taking traditional Brazilian idioms and sometimes traditional melodies and arranging them or composing pieces in that style. And I thought, wow, that's so great. I should do something like that. But of course, not with Brazilian music. I should do it with that folk music that I grew up with a little kid. We used to sing in school. Hopefully schools are still doing that. So, it was songs like "Oh Susanna" and "Streets of Laredo," uh, songs,
Hash,
yeah, like
Hashabai.
"Hushaby," and so I thought I started looking for songs that I thought I would arrange well for guitar, and I ended up with 11 pieces on there, and I play I think all but two or three of them as solo arrangements, and I found that it was the first time, other than it wasn't the first time I'd arranged music for other traditional music, but that was the first time I'd taken public domain music and arranged it. So again, these were songs that we learned as little kids and learned how to sing in grade school, and it was really fun because even if the songs were simple and just had a simple melody that was over in 25, 30 seconds, I could take that idea and elaborate and actually write additional music by way of arranging this song, and it was great fun. But it was inspired by Paolo Bellinati's approach to Brazilian folk idioms, and I thought, wow, this is such a ripe material for me anyway to make a recording.
Amazing. Now, of this album, if you recall all the songs, what two or three songs would you suggest the audience to listen? I mean, that I can put on the show today.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I always liked Single Girl, which is an old Appalachian folk song. And I
Uh-huh.
do something in there which I've done with a few other of my pieces over the years, which is, play the melody arranged in a certain way and then go into a kind of a double time in the middle, not unlike turning back, where I go into a double time. So, and kind of quote the Star Spangled Banner. And it was an interesting time because I think it was during there were a strife in the Middle East, and I kind of put a few little Middle Eastern scales into the Star Spangled Banner just to kind of be sort of contemporary with it. Another one would be When Johnny Comes Marching Home, which is sometimes people think of it as a patriotic song, which it may be, but it's also a song. The lyrics are kind of a peace or anti-war song as well. So those were fun, and particularly When Johnny Comes Marching Home, I think is from my perspective, when I've performed it, I've really had to be at the top of my game because it's one of the most challenging pieces to play, but really rewarding when I can. So those are two, and I'm trying to think of one other one, maybe something slower like
Shortening bread, maybe.
that's a pretty up tune. Oh,
Okay.
St. James Infirmary would be a good one. That's a very
Okay.
classic blues, and it's a slow song. So the other two are pretty up tempo. So
Oh, okay, great. Because yeah, I wanted to see, and obviously, Oh Susanna, which is pretty well known in your country and elsewhere as well. So those,
yeah,
okay, we'll do that and play those songs so people can get to listen to this album.
yeah.
And we'll listen, and we'll be back for the next album.
Okay.
Permasalud Glamping Lodge te espera en la provincia de Imbabura, en Ecuador, para que te conectes con la naturaleza, recuperes energía y bienestar. Te ofrecemos domos full equipados y carpas de glamping con toda comodidad. Escoge entre paquetes básicos de estadía y paquetes completos que incluyen desayuno y acceso al área de nuestra piscina natural con baño turco e hidromasaje. ¿Necesitas un espacio de paz y tranquilidad? Entonces este es el lugar preciso. Visita nuestra web permasalud.com o envíanos un mensaje de WhatsApp al 0999-203-203.
Estás escuchando New Age, el programa de la nueva era.
Okay, Alex, we're back, and now we have, let's see, in the list of songs it comes The Mania, which is a 2006 album.
Yeah.
And in this album, you are with Michael Mandring and Christopher Garcia. It's a great
Right.
album. So what can you share about, gosh, my glasses. What can you share about working with them in this album?
Yeah, well, I'd known Michael for quite a while because Michael was an artist on the Windham Hill label. He got started on the label by playing and recording and performing with Michael Hedges, who was an
Yeah.
amazing guitarist, of course. And so Michael got known that way, and then eventually made two or three. I'm not sure how many, a number of solo albums. Solo bass, which is kind of an unusual thing. And Michael has such a unique approach to playing the bass. He plays it like a lot of times like a melodic instrument, and then with the use of electronics and extended techniques that he uses, he can sound very orchestrated. So when we had worked together over the years, I mean, way back, as far back as I think, '83, when we did the Windham Hill Live at the Berkeley Performance Center. I was one of the producers, and Michael played on the piece Clockwork in that live performance. So we'd had chances to play some together, not a lot. And then he and I were talking one day, and we said, "Hey, we should do a trio thing." And Michael said, I just met this guy, this percussionist from LA, Chris Garcia, and so we all got together. And Chris is an amazing musician. He had been just started touring with the original members of Frank Zappa's bands called the Grandmothers of Invention, and that's pretty rigorous music. It's not easy to play, and so Chris had studied. He's a drummer. He plays a trap set, but he also had studied tabla and various hand percussion. And so we decided that that was a better way to go than have a whole drum set, because we wanted to keep a little lighter sound. So it was Chris on various tabla and various percussion, Michael on electric bass, and myself on acoustic guitar. And we all wrote pieces for that first recording. We arranged a couple. Some were very spontaneous. Like we did do an arrangement of "The Water Is Wide," which is another famous traditional folk song. And with some of that stuff like that, we said, let's just play it. And we said, well, should we talk about it or write a chart or anything? No, let's just play it. So there was a lot of improvisation involved in that project. Most of the songs did have charts, but then it also had a lot of improvisation, and some, especially Chris's, they're just an idea. Like, we're going to start with this, and then it's going to go into kind of a free improv. So we did that album, and we toured quite a bit for a while, and then we all kind of got busy with other projects, and that we haven't played together as a trio for quite a while now, but. That was a lot of fun because we got to stretch out and do a lot of live improvisation.
And so what I was wondering, now that you had a label, and then maybe you were recording with other labels, how did it played out, the choosing a label or just doing printing your own album? How do you market the albums?
Well, that's a good question. We're still trying to figure that out. Again, I started with my Tropo Records label in 1998 with The Water Garden, and that was a time when people were starting to do their own labels, and even pop musicians, some of the big names, and rock musicians, and it was a moment where people realized, we can probably do this ourselves without a major label. So we were very fortunate with, again, as I mentioned, with the Water Garden, we found a distributor. I knew how things kind of worked back then anyway, and we hired someone to do publicity and somebody to work radio and someone to help us market it. So we hired independents, and we had a budget to do that back then, and it paid off in the sense that we had success with it both critically and we got our money back and made something off it as well. Ever since then, it's just become increasingly more difficult. A lot of people are doing their own labels now, or just self-produced projects. And especially in the streaming era, it's just getting harder and harder for musicians to make a living from that, because it just doesn't pay the way it used to when you could actually sell CDs and make some money on the sale of each CD. That may be something to continue with later in this conversation. I don't know, but it's become so we still do a little of that marketing. We hired somebody, for example, with this most recent album, Everything's Changed, to do some radio work, but radio generally does not have the influence that it used to, unfortunately, because I personally love radio. Podcasts and internet radio are still pretty viable, but they certainly help spread the word, get your music out there. But it is increasingly more difficult. So back then, though, we were still operating on what I think of as the old paradigm or the old model, which was, you know, you make a record, you get it to the distributor 2 or 3 months in advance. You hire some independent people, or if you're a bigger record company, you have them in-house, people who can do marketing and promotion. Um, and then, you coordinate everything and put the record out and get it into all the stores and everything like that. That world is pretty much gone now. So
Yes.
it's really about streaming, and as I'm sure you read about and hear about, there's only a handful there's this much smaller percentage of musicians, musical artists who are making a living from streaming royalties. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
pretty small group. Yeah.
Yeah, and also to tell you the truth, radio is practically like 100-year-old on the verge of dying because I remember not too long ago a friend of mine who works with me on our project of radio streaming and everything. He was somewhere and he asked a teenager if they listened to radio, and the teenager said, "What is radio? Can you believe it? What is radio?" I mean, they don't. Most teenagers or adolescents or early 20s, even in the 30s, they don't listen to radio anymore. They listen to Spotify or streaming or something like that, but they don't even know what radio is. I was so shocked that
Yeah.
within such a small time period, everything that we knew, you know we went from CDs to MP3s, obviously from LPs to CDs, then to MP3s, and now everything's streaming. Everything's changed in such a short period of time that yet for our generations it has been difficult to adjust. So I was wondering if maybe concerts is the best way to get an income from the music nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, that's what people say. It's touring, playing gigs, and also, there are there are if you can license your music for a film, or if, television or something like that, those are deals where you can make some money. And of course, it's like everything else, the more prominent or the bigger productions, are would pay well. If you can, get a song placed in a major film, that's a good way to make money. That's hard to do, and it's a rather nebulous process because, um, I know some people inside the biz, and they just say, they're making a film, they have temporary music that they're put in there, and then they're going, okay, we want to find somebody, and somebody involved in the film, the music supervisor or the director or whatever, says, we want this kind of song. And then they hear something and they go, that's it. So there's no systematic way, it's very tough to have your music, there for people to look at, and music supervisors and so forth. It's usually like they just discover something and then they say, oh, that's it, we're going to do that. So that can happen, but it's something that's you can't rely on the way you would market, say, CDs in the old days, or trying to get streams on all these services today. There are a few, like Sirius Radio is can be a way. Some of them are on a different model, satellite radio and so forth. There are some that do pay much better, and there are also still some radio, like if your music is with ASCAP or BMI or CSAC or whatever the rights organization is in the country where your music's being played, people can still make money doing that as well. But the opportunities to actually make royalties off of the recording itself are pretty slim these days.
Yeah. And I was wondering also, how much do you lose your freedom to pursue your own creativity if you need to create specifically for like the music, the film industry, or you know, how much can you lose your freedom to flow with whatever calls you to do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't personally worry about that because, we have our own label and I kind of do what I do, want to do. And, if it's has some success, that's great. I can say that because I'm older and I was very fortunate to do pretty well earlier on. So, but I look at young artists today who are trying to make it, and really good musicians, their 20s and 30s, and they're trying to kind of make it, and they're not pop musicians necessarily. They're in areas where they should be making a living, but they have to really, really hustle playing gigs. And if you're in a band, and there's a band to pay and everything, it's really tough. People are struggling, I think, and that's why you hear so much. You hear a lot of people who are very unhappy with the whole streaming model because they're saying, "Hey, I put all this money into producing this recording, and it's been out for a year, and I've made, $300."
Yeah,
You know, we just spent
yeah.
$20,000 making a recording. So, there's that kind of frustration out there that's is not very encouraging for musicians who are trying to establish themselves and be successful enough to continue doing what they want to do.
Do you think that whatever this journey, modern journey, develops into, might uh, kill people's interest to become musicians since they cannot make a living out of it?
Well, yeah, I think that's hard to say. I think, yes, potentially it can drive people away and say, well, I'm not going to try to become a professional musician or pursue a career in it. You do find people out there who have maybe have a career where they can freelance a little bit and they put out. They're also very good musicians and they make some money from their main gig, like say you're a programmer or something like that, or some kind of job where you can do it, the gig economy, I guess you could say, where you do this for a little while, make a little money, and then spend a lot of time working on your music. And I think with people like that, they can still have a satisfying side career, if you will, as a musician, but not have to worry so much about making a living.
Yeah.
Um, that's for me. I'm in an age now where I'm really slowing down, and I've been teaching more and not traveling so much. Still producing music, but I'm less concerned about making a living doing it than I was when I was younger. But I was all in. I mean, for 45 years, that's all I ever did. I didn't have
Yeah.
another job. And people
You
ask you,
know,
well, like, well, how did you make a living doing that? Wasn't it hard? And did you have another job to support it? And I said, no, I didn't. I mean, to be honest, I was quite fortunate, but I think it was easier to make a living in the past doing it. Yeah.
yeah, when I interviewed Lorena McKennett, she said something that really struck me and concerned me a little. She said that they were like in schools, they were stopping to offer classes of music classes,
Yeah.
and so the arts are basically being taken out of the pensum of the school pensum, and that I found it so sad because the arts are probably the best way to connect to your spiritual self or your inner self, if we don't we take that spiritual out. um have you found out, now that you teach as well, that this is happening all over?
Well, I'm not sure exactly when you spoke to Lorena, and if I'm not mistaken, she's Canadian, right?
She's Canadian. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. A
so
couple months ago.
I don't know that much about the scene in Canada, but here in California, um, there a lot of music programs and arts programs for public schools were killed, or they were stopped for a long time. And I think we're starting to see it come back a little bit. There's been some funding in California that's allowing some more music classes to come back. I live in a small town now. We have one main high school, and there's a couple smaller private schools. The public high school has actually a pretty good music program. They have a band class for orchestral and jazz band instruments, and they have a guitar class as well. I think it used to be a little more robust about 15, 20 years ago, but it seems right at the moment it's coming back a little bit. There seems to be more funding. But yes, it's been tough. I think if you went back 5, 10 years ago, things were pretty bleak here in California in the public school system in terms of music, and I think people are starting to maybe kind of realize again, it's really important. I mean, you've probably read those studies that show that kids that learn to play music usually do better in school in general, and they socialize better, and whether they're going to go on to a music career or not is sort of ultimately secondary, because the benefits are really they're provable. That it's proven that they benefit. We're also fortunate in this community. We have a great school called SPACE, and it stands for School for Performing Arts and Cultural Education, and it's a nonprofit. It's a private nonprofit school, and it's bilingual, English and Spanish, and kids go to after school programs, and they have extensive summer programs for primarily for theater and dance, and to a certain extent music. And so that's been great. And because it's a nonprofit, they have a very vigorous scholarship program to make sure that kids whose families don't have the funds to pay, are able to come. And I've done a number of fundraising concerts for them, and the community really pulls together. So I feel fortunate where we are, but I do think this has been, and maybe still is, a real problem. And you can't undervalue the arts. I mean, there was a while where it was like, well, we've got to improve our math scores so we can compete with other countries and technology and all that stuff. And I'm sure that's valuable, but I think the arts bring a real richness to everybody's life, and just generally make education for kids much better.
Yeah, I'm glad that it's coming back. Now we drifted away from the mania for whatever reason. So we're coming back, and so if I've chose 4 songs from this album, and
Yeah.
if you want to comment on any of these, please do so. This Side Up,
Yeah.
Painted Black,
Yeah.
McCoy, and The Water is Wide. What would you like to share about these songs?
Well, first of all, This Side Up, it's a piece that I wrote, and it's in 7/4 time. So instead of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's a little, it has a little bit unusual rhythm in that way. It's just kind of an up-tempo song that has kind of a zigzagging melody that made me think of, is this right? Are we right side up or are we upside down? And when you get a package, sometimes it'll say this side up. So it was sort of meant to be slightly humorous. And then let's see, the other ones were McCoy. That's also a piece that I wrote that was inspired by the jazz pianist McCoy Tyner, who I'd seen a number of times and had the good fortune to play right in front of once at the Telluride Jazz Festival in Colorado. I just love the way he plays, and when I wrote that piece, he's a pianist, but it felt a little bit like the kind of harmony that and rhythm that he might use in some of his music. So that was inspired by McCoy Tyner. And that definitely has improvisation in the middle. So it's a little bit longer piece, kind of stretches out there. And then The Water is Wide, that was just a group improvisation on the traditional folk song. It's a slow kind of open form piece, and totally, even though we all knew the song and we knew the chord changes, we never really said this is what we're going to do. We just said let's just play it, and that's the way that came out. There was one other now.
Yeah. But I mean, I know you say improvisation, but it is. I would like to understand if you just say we know that song, so just sit and play. Who follows who in the rhythm?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we had a couple things. Like I said, I'll play the melody the first time, and while we said Michael, let him do something kind of sonic because he does all these cool sounds. And then I'll play the melody the first time, and then maybe Michael will play it, and then we just kind of jam on it. But so like I say, we knew the chords and we knew the melody, so that was kind of enough to do that, and it just sort of, it's very organic the way it developed, and I think I love that version of it, but it would be somewhat different if we played it again.
Oh, I'm sure.
Each time we played it, yeah.
And the last song is Painted Black.
Oh, right. So that's also in that's of course a Rolling Stones, a Mick Jagger tune from one of their very first albums. And I always liked that song, and I was sometimes I just pick up the guitar and start playing whatever comes to my head, and I don't know why. For some reason, I thought of that. I grew up, I'm a child of the '60s and listened to the Stones and the Beatles, and they're kind of in my head. Like I'll never, I just know them, because I listened to them so much, and I was young and made such an impression. So I was just playing it, and I kind of started playing, and I said, oh, this would be kind of interesting to change the rhythm. And I thought, hey, this rhythm works. And then I realized, again, I was in 7/8 time signature, which means counting, 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 3 3, or 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1, and that those guys, Michael and Chris are such great musicians, and Chris loves that kind of stuff. He's like, oh yeah, we're gonna have a lot of fun with this. So I made the basic arrangement, and then we all worked on the details, and so there you have it. So it's that particular kind of 7/8 rhythm is very influenced by Balkan music from Bulgaria and that part of the world. And again, back in the 80s, there was that very successful recording of the Bulgarian women's choir. In French, it was Le Mystère de la Voix Bulgare, which was the Bulgarian voices. And I loved that music. So that was another thing that's kind of been in my head. I've used that kind of, I briefly studied that music with a woman who had started a group called Kitka here in the Bay Area. And, it's just always fascinated by those rhythms, and it just seemed to kind of work. So it's a Balkan version of a Mick Jagger song.
Yeah, there are amazing groups that do music sort of like Le Mystère de Bois Vulgaire. There are other from that area, those countries. There are different groups that do something similar. That it is amazing. I don't remember the names of the groups, but it is very interesting that you are open to so many foreign rhythms and options. That's great.
Yeah.
So why don't we listen to these songs and then we'll come back to talk about two of your albums, As You Drift Away and The Bridge. How about that?
Okay, great.
Great.
Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, hogar sustituto para adultos mayores. Contáctanos al 099-753-8085.
Permítenos acompañarte con New Age.
Okay, Alex, before we go on to talk about those two albums I mentioned earlier, I wonder if there are any contemporary guitar players that you sort of admire, that you listen to and sort of find that their way of playing is quite admirable.
Yeah. Well, it seems that, when I was younger, I had my guitar heroes, or just even when I started my career, I had musicians that I love to, guitarists that I love to listen to. People, everything from some of the ones I mentioned in the last episode, like the British Isles players, like John Renman and Bert Jansch, and then Leo Kaki and John Fahey, the first kind of American solo steel string guitar. And then eventually more jazz-oriented and international musicians like Egberto Gismonti, the Brazilian I mentioned, Ralph Towner with the group Oregon. Yeah, and many, many more, Pat Metheny. But now that I'm older, there's so many good young players out there now who are really taking this fingerstyle genre and this steel string, and especially all the extended techniques, a lot of percussion and all that. Um, you know, I, there's so many. But I don't follow them as closely as I have. Um, so I would say, just let me think. Let me.
Well, maybe
my
I can ask you about one,
Okay,
because
yeah, there you go.
yeah, you mentioned, yeah, ever since last program, I don't know why when I'm talking to you, this name comes and goes and comes and goes, and I said, oh, I have to ask him about it. And
Yeah.
this musician just turned 70 not too long ago, and that's Pat Metheny. And
Oh
I
yeah.
was wondering, since you are involved also with jazz, uh, how do you feel about what his music, especially when he was with the Pat Metheny group, and now that he's doing so different and varied kind of music now?
Yeah.
How do you like him?
I think he's great. I mean, he's one of those guys who got started very young in his career, and just took off immediately. And I don't think he's probably looked back. I don't know how many gazillions of recordings he's made, but and I did get to meet him once teaching at a summer guitar camp, but didn't really get to know him. But I've seen him perform a couple times, and he's both an acoustic guitar player and obviously an electric guitar player. I love his electric guitar sound because sometimes I think that gets a little overlooked with jazz electric guitar players. Jazz guitar players who play electric guitar, sometimes the tone is overlooked a little bit for the complexity and the chords and the soloing and so forth. So I think it's his sound, especially when he kind of came on the scene, people were like, wow, that's a really cool guitar sound. Um, so but I think he's played so many different kinds of music that could be called jazz, and some that even I believe he won a New Age Grammy for one of his solo acoustic albums. And so, he's really explored a lot of things, and he's done some more avant-garde jazz. He's played more pop stuff. And then I haven't followed very much recently. I know the Los Angeles Guitar Quartet, who I know those folks, they have played some of his arrangements of his stuff, and he's written some music that they have played. So, he's really covered a lot of ground, and I think, and then he's got this whole mechanical thing that I don't know very much. I haven't really followed that. I should catch up on that, where he created a mechanical instrument, guitar like, and so yeah, I think he's great. I think he really bridged the gap between a lot of different types of music, and that's partly why he was so successful. But he's just a great player, so that
Mhm.
too.
Great, thank you. Well, let's talk about As You Drift Away, because this is one of the lullabies, right? The
Yes,
lullabies album.
right.
I've chosen the Rain Is Pouring from this album.
Yeah.
Why? I think we mentioned also last time because there was another lullaby album that you did before. Would be the second album, is it?
Well, it's actually the same recording, Gloria.
Oh.
It was originally released as Beyond the Night Sky, and then it got the label went through some changes, and I'm not sure what happened, but as happens in the music business, sometime the album got sort of, along with a lot of the albums on that Earthbeat and Music for Little People label, which was two labels. Um, and they had, major distribution for a while, and then something happened to the company. I'm not really sure. And when they kind of reemerged, they said, "Hey, we want to re-release that album again, but we're going to release it on the children's side, not the Earthbeat side, and it's going to be." Um, we changed the name, so to As You Drift Away. Each one of those are titles of pieces on the same album, so different cover, but it's really the same project.
Yeah, I see. So, the rain is pouring. Well, why do a lullaby album? Is this something they asked you, or were you connected to the project somehow for any personal reason?
Yeah, no, they specifically came to me and said, "Hey, we would like you to do this album of lullabies from around the world." Again, their Earthbeat Records was or is a world music label, and Music for Little People was a children's label, and they had some pretty impressive people doing lullabies for the children's label, mostly singers, like Bobby McFerrin was one. I'm trying to think who else did lullaby, but they had some other pretty well-known vocalists, and they wanted an instrumental album, and they also wanted to bridge the gap between the world music and the children's thing. So they said, let's. They came to me and said, we would like you to do instrumental arrangements of lullabies from different parts of the world. So,
Hmm.
there's a Spanish one. There's, I can't remember what that one is. That a Ukrainian one? I can't remember. It was, it's from somewhere in that part of the world. And there's a Brazilian lullaby. There's a West African lullaby.
Swedish. There's a
Oh,
Swedish,
there's also a
Swedish,
Swedish lullaby,
great
Spanish
Brahms lullaby.
lullaby. Yeah. So, and there's one from Lebanon. So, it was kind of a world music lullaby album.
Mhm.
And, I did a few of the pieces on there are solo guitar, but it seemed like when I was working on it, it was going to work better. And it came out that I had a number of really great guest musicians play on there. The Rain is Pouring. I have a funny story about that because at a few years after that came out, I was teaching my summer guitar workshop, and I had a student who came, and a lot of these were very good players, and so it was like a master class. And he said, "I'm going to play your piece, The Rain is Pouring," and I kind of said, "Okay." So he started playing it, and it sounded really good. And then he got to this one part, and he said, "I don't understand how you do this." And I looked at him and I said, you know, that's two guitars. You're trying to play it as a solo guitar piece. I said, you should be showing me how to play that because I had to use two guitars to do it. And it was a funny situation, but so that is actually two different guitar parts. So I wasn't always trying to like say, oh, this is the most amazing solo guitar playing, but creating it was a studio project, let's say that.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't
Uh-huh.
necessarily one where I was going to go out and play a lot of lullabies. In fact, there was a magazine called Tower Records. When Tower Records was still going strong, they had
Alive.
a magazine called Tower Pulse, and they would every in the back of the magazine every month or every 2 months, but however it came out, they would put it. There was a guy who did a cartoon, and they chose me to do a cartoon with once. And one of the panels in the cartoon says, and then he put out a lullaby album, and it shows me playing in a little intimate cafe or something, and everybo's falling asleep at the table.
How
And I
funny.
thought it
That's
was
cool.
pretty funny because it's a lullaby album, I mean,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that was the intention, but it wasn't something. I have occasionally played one or two of the pieces in concert, but I wouldn't do a whole program of it.
Oh, you would have everybody falling asleep then.
Yeah.
Well, what happened between 2008 and 2020? Because your next album, The Bridge, is from 2020, and this one, As You Drift Away, is from 2008. So there's a huge gap of you not producing or creating music. What happened those years?
Wow. Well, that's a good question. I was still out performing, and at the time I had an agent who had been booking me from 2006 until 2017 or something like that, 18. And um, I had a few commissions in that period. So one one was actually in 2006, so kind of right before then, but um, which was I got commissioned to write a piece for co-write a piece with a wonderful violinist named Jeremy Cohen, who has a group called Quartet San Francisco. They do jazz arrangements for a string quartet, and he and I were commissioned to write a piece for steel string guitar, string quartet, and string orchestra. So I I wrote the initial guitar part. Jeremy came in and started to orchestrate it, and then he wrote a little bit. And anyway, we performed this piece in 2006 at the Herbst Theater in San Francisco, and I was on stage with 27 string players, and that was a really new and different experience for me. And something when I did that project, it made me think about what else I could be doing as a guitar player. In other words, besides playing solo or playing in a small ensemble. And I think I got kind of lost in that for a while. And then I had another commission in that same period of time from the New York Guitar Festival to, um, at the time, the festival was big. It went on for about 3 weeks in all kinds of big and small venues in New York. And they would commission a few people each year to do something called Silent Films Live Guitars. So I was commissioned to write and perform and improvise a score for solo guitar for a film, silent film, and the story I chose, the theme was Asian films that year. So I chose one called The Story of Floating Weeds by uh, Ozu, the famous Japanese filmmaker. And I, after the initial performance in New York, my agent started booking me all over, and I did a lot of touring with that film, and that became kind of my main gig for a while. And I was still doing some solo dates, but I was doing a lot of those. And I don't know, I kind of just was cruising along doing that and experimenting with writing a lot of music that has never seen the light of day, to be honest. I have a lot of stuff kind of that I wrote that I'm not so sure about. And some of it was intended to be with, a larger ensemble, but I don't know. I kind of pulled back a little bit after a while from the music scene, and I was like, yeah, maybe just kind of, I wouldn't say take it easy, but, just interest in other things. And, it wasn't until about 2000, let's see, when was it? But probably around uh, somewhere in there too, I started to play with another guitarist, Andrew York, and we did a lot of duo concerts. And
21,
yeah, and we
2021.
that's we eventually made a little EP, but we had been prior to that EP coming out, we'd been playing a lot of gigs together for about 5 or 6 years, and we kept talking about getting a recording out, but we didn't. So between those two things, touring with this film and playing a live score with the showing of the film and working with Andrew York, that seemed to fill up a lot of the time. But it was when I finally got the bridge recorded, and it took a while to release it. I was like, wow, I can't believe it's been that long. I asked myself the same question. What happened?
Well, you were busy with other things. But when you were sharing this, I was wondering, how do you feel, or where? I don't know how to phrase this question exactly, but I want to make a point about composing versus arranging. Maybe
Yeah,
where do you feel the most joy, or how different is it, the composing versus the arranging arenas?
right, right. Well, I when I started out back in the late 70s, I was only writing and playing my own music. I mean, that's all my early records are just my music. And the idea of arranging something really hadn't occurred to me until the until this um, until I did the let's see until I did the well I originally did the until I did the Bolivian Blues Bar, I guess. And then, I followed up with the folk songs, 21st century, and then I did the arrangement of lullabies. So I suddenly got on this streak of doing albums of arrangements, and I really started to enjoy it. And oddly enough, after doing that, I started to find it less. I started to find it a little more difficult to write my own music. And when I did, I was always trying to overcomplicate it, I think. And sometimes, that they ended up in the scrap pile. So it took me a long, long time to get back to the point of doing some of my own music. But um, so I enjoy them both, but I think in my older version of myself, I just find it more. I find it easier and more natural in a way to arrange music. Now, there's a lot of creativity involved in the arrangement because if you listen to my arrangement of folk songs, for example, you will hear somewhere in there you'll hear the original melody, but a lot of them I changed the rhythm. I mean, I actually changed the meter or the count. So um, when I did "Oh Susanna," for example, on the folk song album, we did it kind of like a samba. It had a very Brazilian sounding rhythm. And then when I did on that same album when I did. Uh, a Single Girl, which is an old Appalachian folk song. It's got almost like a little bit of a hip hop kind of feel to it. So
Yeah.
and then I have to write a lot of additional music that's not part of the original melody. So there's a lot of writing. Actually, there's a lot of composing that goes into that. It's just the starting point is something familiar that's already been done.
As I mentioned last interview that we did, I find your arrangements are like listening to a new song. I mean, they are so amazing that it's like, oh my God, this sounds so fresh and new that that's why I ask you about composing versus arranging, because your arrangements are really amazing, Alex, and I truly mean what I'm saying. It's like they are some songs, because I remember I had to listen to the original song so I can have an idea. And then I listened to that original song of one of the folk songs, I think it was. And then I listened to your arrangement, says, wow, it's really like new, something new and
Yeah.
beautiful. So you
Yeah.
do great in doing those. So for this album, The Bridge, I have the bridge, obviously, and Mr. B takes a walk in the rain. Who's Mr. B?
Mr. B is James Brown.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So,
So I always joke, there's a movie that, well, certainly people my age and people older as well would know, called Singing in the Rain. And there's a scene in there where Gene Kelly is singing in the rain and dancing, and it's pouring. And I uh, I had been wanting to do a funk tune. I was like, and I actually started at one point to try to arrange one of James Brown's pieces called Popcorn. And I thought it'd be fun to do a James Brown arrangement. But I just couldn't quite figure out how to do it and make it successful. And so I started working, just from a rhythm, and I came up with an original piece that was sort of inspired by James Brown's music. And so I used to joke that if in that movie Singing in the Rain, this, just try to picture James Brown instead of Gene Kelly singing and dancing in the rain. So it's sort of silly, but it's a very funky and technically very difficult piece to play. But I had to kind of innovate some new ways of playing that actually literally had to get my hand muscles to adapt to a little bit over time. But once I kind of did, it seems pretty natural to me to play now. But so that's a fun tune. I enjoy playing that.
it is great. Well, let's listen to the music from as you drift away, the one that I mentioned, and these two from The Bridge. And then we'll come back for Zero Gravity and your latest project with the country music, I guess. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Okay,
Great.
cool.
Okay, let's be back.
Permasalud Glamping Lodge te espera en la provincia de Imbabura, en Ecuador, para que te conectes con la naturaleza, recuperes energía y bienestar. Te ofrecemos domos full equipados y carpas de glamping con toda comodidad. Escoge entre paquetes básicos de estadía y paquetes completos que incluyen desayuno y acceso al área de nuestra piscina natural con baño turco e hidromasaje. ¿Necesitas un espacio de paz y tranquilidad? Entonces, este es el lugar preciso. Visita nuestra web permasalud.com o envíanos un mensaje de WhatsApp al 0999-203-203.
Abre las puertas de tu mundo interior y permanece con New Age.
Okay, Alex, now we're in the last part of the show, and there is an album called Zero Gravity that you made with Andrew York. Is this the first album? I mean, this is the first album that you guys get together to work. How was it? How did you get together, and what is Zero Gravity all about?
Yeah. So I met Andrew York at a guitar festival in Germany that we were both performing at. And in fact, I didn't really know him, but of course I knew who he was and he knew who I was. And he'd even recorded a couple things. Yeah, one song for the Windham Hill label back when. Now, Andrew is a trained classical guitarist, but he composes and writes and mainly performs his own music. But he was with the Los Angeles Guitar Quartet for 16 years, and he did, as well as performing, he did a lot of arranging and composing for the quartet. And that group won a Grammy, and so they're quite successful and quite well known throughout the world. And we ran into each other at this guitar festival in Germany, and we started talking about, hey, maybe we could get together and play. So we did, and I think we started playing together as early as, now I can't remember, 2014 or 15 or something like that. And we started doing a number of concerts together, and he had quit the guitar quartet. He just was ready to move on, and 16 years was enough, touring and performing with 3 other guitarists. So we would get together and do a handful of concerts here and there, and kept talking about doing some recording. And when actually we recorded the pieces for Zero Gravity at the same time that I recorded the bridge. So it was in and among those sessions. Now, and then we just waited. It took a little while to release it. So the piece Zero Gravity, I wrote that inspired by my connection to one of the astronauts who went up first on the space shuttle and then on the International Space Station. He's Dr. Thomas Marshburn, and he is an amateur guitarist. He wrote me a note one day and said, "My name is, Thomas Marshburn. I'm a doctor, I'm an astronaut, and I'm an amateur guitar player, and I'm a fan of your music." He said, "I'm going up on the space shuttle in a few months, and we all get to take one little thing, and I was thinking to take one of your CDs up." And I said, "That's great. Yeah." So I wrote him back, and then after he came back from the space shuttle, he sent me the very CD. It was Deep at Night. He sent that, and in a frame with a montage, a picture of the space station, the space shuttle and the space station, and the crew that he went up with on the shuttle and everything, and the CD. And so I had that framed, and we started having this correspondence through email. And I said, "Well, what's it like being in Zero Gravity?" And he said, "Well, I'm going up on the space station next." And he said, "Would you like to get a call from space?" And I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." So I got a call. It was much like a FaceTime call. We had to go through NASA in Houston. And my wife and I had a big screen here in my studio. And once we got connected, he was floating around the space station with a camera and showing us everything in the space station, and then out the window to Earth. And I met some of the other astronauts, and I even played a couple pieces for the astronauts. It turned out that particular crew, there were 6. There was Thomas, Dr. Marshburn was a amateur guitarist. There's another one who became quite well known. I'm a Canadian. Is it Haley? I forget. And there was a Russian one who played guitar and a little bit of mandolin. And so I played for them. I played a couple pieces for them. Anyway, through all this, I got really interested in what is it like to be in Zero Gravity. And so we had a lot of conversations and emails back and forth while he was in the space station. And so I eventually wrote this piece and dedicated to him. And it's a little out there.
Wow. And how was it to play with Andrew Young? I mean, did you compose the music for 2 guitars, or how was it playing with him on this?
Yeah, well, I did. I wrote the piece for 2 guitars, and that particular piece is pretty challenging. We had to rehearse it quite a bit, and we have performed it some in public. It's really tricky because there's something that happens in that piece. I wanted it to sound like there were things like echo, like bouncing off, like you think of sound and radar and all that kind of stuff, or various technologies that are bouncing off of satellites and stuff. So there's places in there where I play and then he answers and then I answer and back and forth. There's actually a musical term for that called hocket or hocketing. And it happens in certain folk musics, especially in Africa. You'll hear one person sing one note and then the other sing the other note and back and forth. So you have ah, 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 ah. And so we do some of that in there. And that was really hard because the timing has to be dead on to make it work. And so that was a fun piece to do. And that was the inspiration for that. And then we released a piece that I had recorded with Andrew previously that we had not been released on an album, but he had released it as a single called Dysfunction.
Yeah.
And that was a really fun piece. It's a great piece. And then we also had a piece on there that I wrote called Pair of Threes. And
there's only 3 songs in this album, is it?
yeah, it's an EP. Yeah, it's just
Okay.
and it was all digital. There's no physical. We never made a physical CD. But yeah, it was a different project. It was really fun though. Yeah.
Now, you're so great in composing, in arranging. Did you ever embark on producing albums or producing artists or yourself?
Well, actually, I've produced most of my own recordings over the years. My first album was produced by the engineer in the studio, Scott Saxon. Since then, I've produced most of them. The World's Getting Loud, as we talked about in the last session, was produced by Andy Narell, and that's the one that has all the amazing percussion on it and so forth. And but I've mostly produced my own projects. Now I have produced a few projects for others over the years. Nothing particularly well known, but I produced an album for a singer named Elisa Feynman, and all the songs were in Hebrew, with some of them also had Arabic in them. And she's was, as well as a folk singer, she was a cantorial assistant in a synagogue, and that was a really fun project. And I produced a couple other projects that are not well known, but they were fun to produce. And then, of course, more recently, I produced the album with the Real Sarahs, which is a folk or Americana album, I guess you'd say. But
Well, before we go into those that album, what does producing involve? Well, because we hear this is the producer and that, but for us on this side, we probably don't know what production of an album. The producer, what's his job? What does he do?
yeah, well, it can vary quite a bit, but basically, it's making sure that it's taking the project from the very beginning, which may involve rehearsals and arrangements, to the recording sessions, making sure that they turn out the way everybody wants them to, including the artists, and then also making sure that it's mixed properly and mastered, which is the final process. A lot of people are not familiar with that, but mastering is sort of like putting the final coat of paint on something to make sure that the levels are all appropriate for radio and it will sound as good as it possibly can on radio and streaming services and so forth.
Wow.
So making sure that that's all really, it's like taking the project from the beginning to the end and taking responsibility for making it sound as good as it possibly can.
Wow.
So sometimes that means getting in there, and some producers will even end up writing some songs or co-writing songs or doing arrangements, for the music. Sometimes they're just kind of watching over and making sure everything is done properly. And there's some technical aspects to that. A lot of producers are also talented engineers, recording engineers or mix engineers. I know I'm pretty good with recording, but I don't really think of myself as an engineer. So I usually, for most of the projects that I produce, I usually work with an engineer who's got all the chops, because
Hmm.
sometimes I know what sounds good and how it should be done and what's good, but the hands-on part of it is really much more efficient. It's much for me anyway. For my productions, it's much more
Yeah.
efficient that somebody else who's doing that every day is doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Good to know. It's like, yeah, you always have a producer, and my mind, I thought of Alan Parsons. He is this engineer and the producer, and the sound has to be perfect. So it's great. Like in this last project of with Saras, no, the real Saras.
The real
What
service.
is this project about, and what can you share about this album?
Right. Well, the real Sarahs are Sarah Larkin and Sarah Ryan, are two women who are a generation younger than I am, at least, and they live and have been performing as in various configurations, but as a duo or a trio uh, for quite a while. Sarah Ryan's originally from Canada in the Toronto area. Sarah Larkin's from New England originally. So they both met here in Northern California, and once they met and started singing together, there was an instant bond. They're just somehow connected. So they harmonize beautifully together, and they write songs. They've written some very good songs, and they do some covers of things like John Prine, or a number of Kate Wolf, or a lot of Americana singer-songwriters. And so I met them just locally, hearing them play, and I thought, wow, I really like what they're doing. And then we decided to do a concert together, just to see what it would be like, working together. They both play guitar and a little bit of ukulele and so forth, but their main thing is singing. So I was able to maybe bring another level of guitar playing to the project. And after we played a couple gigs together, I thought, wow, we should make a recording together. So we did, and I ended up being the producer. Sarah Larkin was the co-producer on a few of the tracks. But really, what I think I brought to the project was they had these songs they'd written, and we started on this right at the beginning of COVID, and so we had to kind of send things back and forth, emails like MP3s basically, and there was some little app that we could use where we could add tracks and so forth, and say, well, what do you think of this? And a lot of it, what I did early on was listen to the songs and maybe come back and say, hey, great song. What if you played a little faster? Or what if you played it with this, change the rhythm a little bit? Those kinds of things to kind of help, bring a little bit more direction or definition to the songs. And so we went back and forth like that for quite a while. It was a difficult time because of COVID. Sarah Larkin also was involved in a very serious auto accident and nearly died. So she had a long recovery period during this, and Fortunately, she's an incredibly strong person, and she just came back singing better and writing better songs as a result of that. And so the project took a long time. And the other role I played as a producer is saying, hey, let's get this bass player and let's get this person to play. And, so we've got a lot of really wonderful guest musicians on this project. And it was a lot of fun. So for me personally, one of the things that was satisfying is, I think in the last session I mentioned, before I ever made any recordings back in my teens and 20s, among other things, I used to write songs and also sing, songs like Simon and Garfunkel and Stevie Wonder and, whatever. And I just, this kind of took me back to that music. And it really, it made me appreciate how much I really like that music still, what we would just put in a very general terms, folk music. This falls sort of into the category what people call Americana now. And there's, as you mentioned, country. There's one song on here that's pretty country.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we just worked together back and forth, and this is what we came up with. So
Wow. So where can people find this music now?
It's on all the major streaming services. So Spotify, Apple, Amazon.
They can buy from Spotify, and they can buy music through Spotify.
They can download tracks or the album on Apple, for certainly on Apple Music. We did make a small handful of CDs, which can be purchased either by going to my website at degrassi.com or at the realsarahs.com. People can order a CD. We're not distributing the CD because frankly it's kind of more effort than it's worth these days. There's so few people commercial retail outlets where you can buy it. So those are the best bets. But again, if you just want to listen, so it's out there on all the major streaming services.
Great. And what future plans do you have with music?
Well, we have been playing some concerts with the Sarahs, and we're trying to get that project off the ground. I love playing with them; it's so much fun, and especially when we can able to have we just did a concert in our local park, summer concert series with a couple thousand people in the park, and we had a 7-piece band, and that was really fun. So I'd like to do more of that. But in terms of my own plans, I got really involved in teaching the last 4 years, and now I'm finally pulling back, and I'm going to teach a little bit, but not very much. So I want to get back to my own music, and I'm during COVID, I picked up this little instrument, which is technically a ukulele, but it's kind of a slightly larger, and I played this like on so many of the tracks of the Real Sarahs album, and it's a anyway.
Oh my!
I've really fallen in love with this instrument because it's just 4 strings, but it has a great rhythm to it, and it takes me back a little bit to like when I played with Kike, and he's got the charango, which is such a rhythmic instrument. And then of course in South America you have instruments like the cuatro, which is played very rhythmically, and that's how this instrument, to me, I relate to it. So I've been working on a lot of things on this, and I think my plan is, and I've just started to set up in my little studio to do this, is to just start playing a lot of music and recording it, and maybe creating kind of a collage with this instrument with my various guitars because I have a lot of different types of guitars. So to get a lot of something like a guitar collage, and
Oh,
it might
great.
have some recognizable traditional melodies in it, some new melodies. I really am not quite sure where it's going to go, but that's kind of my idea is being able to do
Great.
my own studio as well on my own time. So
That's beautiful. Just one more question because, South American. How do you like the charango? Have you ever tried playing it? Do you like how it sounds and everything?
oh, I love the way it sounds. And I have one. I have a pretty nice one actually. When I was in Bolivia, I got one. Uh, it's just it's the way it's tuned is so unusual, and it's non-linear, meaning the strings don't go from low to high. They kind of start in the middle and then go low, low next, back and forth. And it's takes more effort to tune it because all the strings are doubled, so you have 10 strings. And I love the way it sounds, but since I have had the good fortune to work with
Kike.
Cruz, who really plays beautifully, I was
Yeah.
like, all right, I'll let him play that instrument.
Yeah, leave it to Kike.
I'll leave it to somebody
Great.
who really has it down. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Alex, we're going to listen to Zero Gravity and then three songs from this latest album. I don't know what's the title of the album though, but it's Across the Great Divide.
Yeah, the
Lichen, is it Lichen or Lichen on a Limbo?
lichen on a limb,
Oh,
lichen,
mm,
like a
Lichen on
moth,
a Limb. Yeah, okay,
like a
Lichen on
moth.
a Limb. And Broken Man.
Broken Man is definitely a country song.
Yeah.
That when Sarah Ryan wrote that song, and she sent it to me, and it sounded like kind of soft, and I said, hey, what if we did it like little little more energetic and like a country song where it's not confessionable, like, oh, broken man. And I said, no, like you're really almost pissed off, like, or like, really make it country. So that's how that one came about. By the way, the album is called Everything's Changed. And it's, boy, has it. You even said that a little while ago when we were talking
Yep.
about the music
Yeah,
business. So we
definitely.
thought it was an appropriate title because it came out sort of at the end of, we've just been through COVID. We've, the whole music business has really changed. Their
Definitely.
personal lives went through a lot of changes in the process of making this recording. So it seemed like the right kind of title. And
Perfect
so,
title.
yeah, Across the Great Divide, that's a Kate Wolf song. She was a quite well-known folk singer who died kind of young, and a lot of her songs are being done. It's a beautiful song. Usually, when she did it, and when you hear other artists cover that song, they often do it slow. But we decided to make it an up-tempo tune, and then what was the other one? Oh, Lichen on a Limb. That's a song by Sarah Larkin, and that's a softer, quieter, more introspective song. And if you listen to the lyrics, it's a kind of a reflection on, as I mentioned, she had this tragic auto accident, and now she's doing quite well, but it was a really difficult recovery for her, and I think she wrote that while she was in the hospital laid up, you know thinking about
Wow.
broken bones and how fragile life is. So
It
yeah.
is. It is. Well, gosh, I when I listen to them, they are all great songs, and so that's why we're gonna end up the show today with this music, and we're gonna have the full show in Vimeo. We're gonna have the interview in YouTube. I'll send you the links so
All right.
you can spread them, and obviously in Spotify and iBooks, the full show with the music will be we'll have them there too. So. Gosh, I'm so thankful for giving us your time like this, and I hope people enjoy the music and and the talk that we have had, and they've learned a lot more about who you are. It's been great.
Hey, it's been my pleasure, Gloria. Wonderful to talk with you, and your enthusiasm and knowledge about music is makes it all the more fun. So,
Oh, how cool. Well, Alex, we'll be in contact for the future projects and for everything. We have to adapt to these changes, and we'll see how how we'll be doing the show in the near future, because we cannot even talk about the future, but the near future possibly, I don't know how is it going to be, but
yeah.
we'll hope that our humanness doesn't get turned off by the artificial intelligence, and then we will have two robots talking here.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like much fun. Well,
Uh,
all all right. Well, I look forward to staying in touch, and thank you for also for sending the link. It's very interesting that you mentioned that, because as I think I told you, we have a very good friend, and she goes down and teaches in Ecuador, and we were almost going to all go together a year or so ago, and then it was complications happened, and so.
well, you have a place to visit and to stay. You just let me know, and I'll love to have you in Perma Salud, and just relax, and maybe you get inspired, and I'll take you to Otavalo, and maybe connect with some musicians. I don't know. Well,
Yeah, I
whatever.
would love. I would genuinely love that. Yeah, I would. I'm ready for a trip like that. So,
Okay,
uh,
whenever you're ready, just contact, and we'll see with your friend, and see if you guys come visit.
okay. All right, Gloria. Well,
Thank you.
stay well and take care. And look forward to hearing and seeing some links and all that good stuff.
Wonderful. You take care, and until the next time. Bye bye,
Okay.
Alex.
Hasta la
Bye.
próxima.
Con el auspicio de Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, Serenidad Spa Terapéutico, Permasalud Glamping, Marathon Sports.